Hey everyone, Mike here, and in today's Blade Babble I wanted to talk to you about the Borka Blades M-Stitch. So this is basically the smaller version of the full-size stitch, both of which are custom models from Borka Blades, and they're made by knife maker Sebastijan Berenji. Now you may be familiar with this particular design. There is a Microtech version of this knife called the Stitch, and that's basically made off of the full-size version of this, but it is a push-button auto. So it doesn't have some of the fancy elements that the custom knives have, but the overall shape and design is very similar. But of course, being a fully automatic knife, you're kind of running into issues with legalities in certain states, countries, and so on. So this one is totally manual and totally legal in pretty much any place that you buy it. So that is a nice thing. Now, the actual knife, before we get into what I like, what I don't like about it, let's kind of talk about some of the details. So what we have here is a titanium frame lock knife, not a flipper. It is, Sebastian actually doesn't do any flipper models, I don't believe. He tends to prefer thumb studs or spidey holes, so this one is open via the spidey hole. These are not thumb studs, these are actually the stop pins. You can deploy it as a thumb stud, I mean, if you kind of really coax it out there, but it's not easy just because they're so close to the pivot. It's very difficult to get it out. You can also open it with a thumb this way, but again, it's not kind of the best way to do it. What I tend to find is that the spidey flick here with your middle finger is the best approach for deploying this knife, and it's really well designed to do that. The detent is perfect for spidey flicking it open. So this is the presentation side of the knife here. And then we've got the blade made of M390 steel, which of course is an excellent steel, one of the best that you can get. And this particular version has this sort of what they call an acid wash, but usually I'm not a big fan of acid washes. In this case, this one actually looks really nice. It's got a nice sort of reflectivity to it that shines really nicely actually. So you get these sort of matte elements with the shiny elements, works really well together. And then the handle is this sort of orange peel textured flame anodized titanium, which again, really attractive, and it looks really nice in person. So photos and videos don't really quite do it justice. Here we have the business side of the knife. And let's go into some details on this knife as far as size and weight goes. So the size of this knife is about 7.5 inches overall. The cutting length from the sharpening choil to the end is about 2.75, and the overall length from here to here is 3 inches. So not a huge knife by any means. We can do some size comparisons here. We've got the Riot Knives baby machine, so very similar size, very similar format. Also, a good spidey flicking knife, so it's a perfect comparison really in terms of size. Then we've got, let's do the Benchmade 480 Nakamura. As you can see, that is a little bit smaller, but overall blade size is pretty similar on that one. Certainly not nearly as beefy of a knife. And then let's do a large knife. Let's do the Shirogorov F95R. So as you can see, much bigger, the Shirogorov than the Borka Blade. So overall, again, not a very large knife by any means, carries really well in the pocket. Now, it is a bit heavy. It is 5.1 ounces, which for a knife of that size is quite hefty, and I'll go into the reasons behind that a little bit later in this video. The full-size version of this comes in about 1/2 inch bigger, and it is 6.7 ounces, so it's a really heavy, beefy blade. For me, I prefer this format. I think it's a much nicer format for everyday carry. And even though it's a bit of an aggressive blade shape, it doesn't seem quite as scary when you deploy it in the lunchroom. So it's, overall, it's a nice size for me. I think cutting edge, maybe, it could use a tiny bit more, but for most daily tasks, 2 3/4 is pretty good. And also, you're not really going to run into any legal issues in any city that you carry this in, because it is technically less than 3 inches on the blade length. So that is also a good thing. Now, as far as additional details go here, we've got, this is not an integral construction or anything like that, it's just titanium frame. We have no stainless steel insert on the lock bar, so that is just titanium on stainless steel, which sometimes can cause a little bit of blade stick, but in this case it is perfect. There is no issues there. Really easy to disengage the lock, close it with one hand. Super simple, very smooth. It is not a particularly drop shut kind of knife. Like, once you kind of overcome the the detent ball there, you kind of have to give it a little coaxing to get it down. And I think that's okay. I think given the style of this knife, it's really not intended to be that. And sometimes you don't necessarily need it to be, you know, a drop shutty kind of knife. There's plenty of knives out there. You got your Grimsmo Rasks, Norsemen that like to take off your finger. This one's maybe a nice break from that. So overall, it's not a complaint for me. The overall action of it is still very smooth. And if you kind of pull back on this frame lock, you can see that the blade is really, really smooth, and it is running on washers, or sorry, on bearings. I've seen this listed as running washers, and that's actually incorrect. I talked to Sebastian himself, and he said that they all run bearings. All the mini stitches run bearings. So don't believe what you read if you see one posted and it says that it runs on washers. I've actually taken this one apart, and it's actually got this nice teardrop style washer in between the bearing and the frame, which is pretty cool. It's a nice smooth surface that the bearings can rub against instead of rubbing against the titanium. It's got that on both sides. Really easy to disassemble. Basically just take apart these 3 screws here and then take apart your pivot screw. Really simple to put back together and service. So very nice knife in terms of overall construction. So what do I like about this knife? Well, for one, I really like the design. I think it's a really attractive and unique looking knife, particularly in this grind combination, this sort of compound grind. The blade is really cool in terms of its shape. It's if you kind of look at it flat, you can almost think of it like a Wharncliffe style blade, but then if you sort of, you know, turn it into its more natural position, it's more of like almost a harpoon sort of shape with this additional kind of notch up here and this swedge. And you can almost think of it like a spear point as well. So it's really kind of an interesting combination of blade shapes going on here. And the overall lines, I think, of the knife are really nice, the way it sort of flows through. That makes it also really comfortable in the hand, particularly you've got this nice notch for your thumb to rest up against this, this sort of harpoon edge. And it's just a really comfortable place to put your thumb, and then this large finger choil at the bottom. So it really allows you to choke up on the knife for certain cutting tasks. Now this blade comes in a variety of versions. Like I said, this is M390, and M390 is the standard across all of the M-Stitches. There's some odd ones that have Chad Nichols Damascus, and those are significantly more expensive. But for the most part, M390 is what you're going to find. But you are going to find some differences in the grind. There's like a rock grind that has like a rock texture on the inside here with the top swedge, but then it is more of a hollow grind across the entire knife. This one here is a compound grind with a hollow grind on the inside and a flat grind on the tip here. It makes the tip really nice and strong and sharp, so really good for piercing tasks. And also there's another one that doesn't have the top swedge here. It actually is just flat, and it has the rock grind going across and then a hollow grind across the bottom. So a lot of different variations there that you can find on that. So really, you know, if you're interested in this knife, just make sure you pick one that you are particularly happy with. I'm going to talk about the grind a little bit later as well. So that I really like. I just really like the uniqueness of the shape and the overall design of the knife. I think it's a really cool and interesting design. Overall, kind of hardware is nice as well. These sort of bronzed screws and standoffs, they match really nicely with this flame anodized titanium body. And then beyond that, we've got a really functioning pocket clip here. It just, you know, goes in and out of the pants really nicely. It's fairly tense in terms of the tension, but not so much that you have a hard time getting it in and out of the pants. It sits fairly deep in the pant as well, as you can see. We've got, you know, the tip or the butt of the blade isn't too far off from the edge of the pocket clip here. So really comfortable in the pocket. The only maybe complaint that I have with the clip is that this little point is a bit sharp, and it actually does. My wife has actually complained when she's walking beside me that she nicks her arm on this sometimes. So kind of have your wife walking on the other side of you, I guess, if you're carrying this particular knife. But it would have been nice maybe if they just kind of cut that down a tiny bit and created a little bit more of a chamfer there. But overall, I mean, this knife is really comfortable in the hand. There's no real hot spots. It's really nicely rounded throughout. I mean, any edge, you can see there's no real chamfers per se, but every edge is nice and soft. It's like rounded. It doesn't have any sharp edges anywhere on the inside here of the frame lock. Everything is just kind of, you know, smoothed out a little bit, and it feels really nice in the hand. So that I really like about it too. And just overall, I mean, even though it's a 5.1 ounce blade, it still feels fairly light in the hand. It's well balanced, kind of right behind the pivot point here. So the balance is really good, really nice in the hand, and doesn't feel heavy in the pocket either. I imagine the full-size stitch at 6.7 ounces would feel quite heavy in the pocket, so that's why ultimately I think I like this sort of format for the EDC. And yeah, so those are the things that I like about it. Now, what I don't like, there's really only one thing that I don't like, and that is just the thickness of the blade stock, which is unusually thick on this knife, and I'm not sure it's really necessary. It's kind of to the point where it's almost overkill. I like the fact about this knife that it is, you know, sort of, it feels a little bit more hardcore. It's not like this precision instrument like a Shirogorov F95 where it feels very clinical. This one is a little bit more rough around the edges, but in sort of a good way, and it's in a unique way. So I like that about it, and I think that, you know, that's what they're going for with this thick blade stock, is to make it really solid, really chunky and beefy. But the problem with that is obviously it makes the weight fairly high on this at 5.1 ounces. I mean, for a 3-inch blade, that is a bit of an off ratio. And so, I mean, if we compare the blade stock to something like the Riot, it's really, you know, a fair bit thicker than the Riot. The Riot's already a fairly thick blade stock at about 150 thousandths. This one comes in at 190 thousandths. So it is really, really thick. And if we compare it to something like the Benchmade Nakamura here, you can see that that is almost twice the thickness on the blade stock. So that does not necessarily make it a very good slicer. If you have one that has the hollow grind going across the entire blade, that might be a pretty good slicing tool still. You know, I mean, it's not going to be perfect. It's not going to be anything like, you know, a Spyderco Paramilitary or the Shirogorov F95, which just, you know, has a full frat grind almost and a thinner blade stock. So if you're looking for a good slicer, then you're probably going to have to look elsewhere. But obviously, you know, if you're buying this knife, it's probably not going to be your only knife. So if you're looking for a good slicer for that particular occasion, you're just going to carry a different knife. So for me, you know, that's not really an issue. You're just really buying something that is fairly unique in the blade. So, you know, the one upshot there is, though, that Sebastian does a really nice hollow grind on this. It is very thin behind the edge. And obviously, this one being a compound grind, we have a flat grind towards the tip. And so it is pretty thick behind the edge on this flat ground portion, almost twice as thick, actually, than the hollow grind section. So if you have one that has a full hollow grind going sort of across the knife, then you'll be pretty good for slicing and, you know, sort of any day, everyday cutting tasks. So depends on really what you are after, and so kind of consider that when you're picking your blade shape. So that's my only gripe about it. I think if they made this just a tiny bit thinner, maybe 150 thousandths like the Riot, you could also shave down the weight a little bit by doing some internal milling on this handle. They haven't done any milling because I think they wanted to keep that nice balance point here. Being such a blade heavy knife, if they milled this out, then it would really kind of tip towards the front, and so I don't think they wanted to do any milling for that particular reason. But, you know, that's really my only gripe there. Everything else, as far as the action, is really nice, really easy deployment, really easy to fold up. The lock bar tension is good. Detent is really good. It's a strong detent, but with a Spidey flick, it's really easy to open. I mean, you know, just do it a couple times and you'll really get used to that detent. It's nice that they kind of chamfered the insides of the Spidey hole so it doesn't really dig into your finger too much. And again, you know, no lock stick or anything like that. So everything functions really well, and it's just a really enjoyable, unique, and fun piece to carry with you. So overall, I really recommend this knife. Obviously, being a custom piece, it is quite pricey, ranging anywhere from $1,400 to $4,000 really if you get into the Chad Nichols Damascus models. But, you know, generally speaking, on the secondary market, you can find them in the $1,400 to $2,200 range for kind of the more standard configurations. And when it comes to custom knives, that's kind of, you know, that's not really on the super high end. It's not on the low end. It's sort of in the middle there. But I think overall the knife is worth it. It's really well made. It's a unique piece, and I just think it's a really, really cool looking knife. And I just wanted to share my thoughts with you because I found that, you know, this isn't a fairly popular knife in the knife community, but it seems to be shrouded in mystery a little bit. I've never really seen anybody talk about it, give any sort of impressions about it. So just wanted to at least kind of get one video on YouTube where I share my impressions in case you are interested in this knife. Now I'm sure the full-size Stitch model is very similar in terms of the overall fit and finish. It's just much larger. So if you come across that one, just be aware of the, you know, fairly hefty weight at 6.7 ounces. And again, I think for everyday carry, this one is really a great format. So hopefully you liked that video. If you did, make sure you give me a thumbs up down below. And if you loved it, make sure you subscribe so you'll get more Blade Babble in the future. Have yourself a great day.